Welcome to the Bernina 880 Mastery Live. This is our Lesson 5, Smooth Operators with Susan Fears.
Thanks, Catherine, and welcome everyone. As we continue on with our Mastery Live series, this is very exciting. We're going to be talking about tools that you have with the machine that just make things go smoothly. Makes your sewing happen smoother. So we're going to be working with buttonholes today. We're going to look at the tapering menu. We're going to talk about dual feed, the Bernina dual feed, and what that's going to offer you as a sewer. We're also going to look at the Bernina stitch regulator, and we're also going to take a look at how you would do some bobbin play with this great machine, because with a jumbo bobbin we can certainly stitch a lot longer. So first off, starting off, we're going to start with the buttonholes. You do have an automatic buttonhole foot number 3A, and if you have a buttonhole menu with lots of buttonholes to work with. Some of these are decorative, some of these are geared towards certain fabric types that you might want to work with. Many times you can select the help on the system settings bar and put the, touch the question mark, touch the buttonhole, and it'll tell you exactly what it is for. You'll also notice in this menu you have a button sew-on program, which is number 60, and you have 2 eyelets. Now buttonhole foot 3A, the buttonhole has to be in the size of that foot, but this is an automatic foot, and when you do make a buttonhole with it, it records it, saves it to memory. So if you're making a project with lots of the same buttonhole, you want them to all be the same size, and this foot does facilitate that. When you select a buttonhole, you'll see the foot on the screen. You'll see a little white dot. That indicates the center of the buttonhole. That can be really helpful because many times we place a dot where we want the buttonhole to start, but the needle in the past has always been usually been to far left, and that doesn't help us. We have to eyeball it. So now that the little needle point is right in the center, so we know exactly where we can line things up. It's just perfect. The eye will reveal all of the different functions that you'll have to work with the buttonhole. So things like setting the length of the buttonhole. We'll talk about some of the icons, additional icons, in just a few minutes. The screen diagram provides clues for what you need to do. So there's a image of a button. You want to hold that to the screen, and then with one of your stitch length knobs, and you can use either one of the width or the length knob, you're going to turn the dial until the yellow circle surrounds the button that you're holding to the screen. It will create the size that you need, and it will automatically add 2 millimeters for clearance, and that will take into account the height of the button so that it will pass easily through the buttonhole that you're getting ready to stitch. So we're going to stay in the eye function for buttonholes, so we're going to select the eye breadcrumb, and this is part of the navigation that you want to start learning, because there's no sense in closing out and then having to come back in. We're going to adjust the slit width. This is a great technique when you're working with really bulky fabrics and you just need those beads of the buttonhole to be a little bit more spaced apart. So again, we've selected the button slit width. We use the dial to adjust the width of the beads that we want, and you do have a maximum distance of 2 millimeters. You do want to select the eye breadcrumb. We'll go back. It does show you what our final setting was. So our our slit width adjustment we set to 1.4. This is a variable that you decide what you want it to be. You see that the length of our buttonhole is to 25, so it's making those, we're recording those adjustments that we're making, so we can see right there on the screen. Sometimes when you use the button slit width adjustment, you want to make the beads of the buttonhole a little bit wider, and that is another option that you can do. So using your stitch width knob, adjust the buttonhole beads until they're a little bit wider to about a 5.7, and this is just going to give you a buttonhole that looks more in proportion. You've got the beads spaced apart, so you probably don't really want really tiny beads, and if it is a thick fabric, you probably want some beads that are fairly substantial. When it comes time to stitch this out, you're going to let the machine do all the work. It's going to do the back, it's going to knot, it's going to do a back end, it's going to stitch both beads in both directions, it's going to do another tie off after the bar tack, but you get all components of the buttonhole. Now it is a program, and in order to get all of those pieces you need to keep your foot depressed on the foot control the entire time. And this might be a really good time to start using the start-stop button. Be sure you put your speed level down to about half or a little bit before medium, and then use your start-stop button to make that buttonhole. Then you're sure to get all the pieces that you need. Go ahead and select clear to reset the settings. So now we have taken everything off of this buttonhole that we had just made. There is an option to do a manual buttonhole, because you may have noticed that your 3/8 foot, well, there's an end. So that buttonhole is only ever going to be is the maximum of that size of the foot. So if you have a buttonhole to make that needs to be bigger than the 3/8 foot, you're going to select manual. And then the presser foot's recommendation changes to 3C, another foot that you have with your machine. In the little, what we called before our action bar, when we were working with combi mode, you're going to see the different segments of the buttonhole. So you'll see the little knot, you're going to see the beads, and this is exactly how the buttonhole is going to stitch out. And you're going to advance it to each of the little units that you're going to do. So as you start, it'll sew the first part of the buttonhole. You're then going to see the little quick reverse image pop up on your screen. What this means is to advance to the next section of the buttonhole is you'll want to tap that button, the physical button on the machine, to advance to the next spot. And you'll continue doing that until you've completed all sections of the buttonhole. The next step would be to sew on the buttons, and there's no better way to sew buttons on for decorations or for anytime you have to do a closure than using the button sew on program in foot number 18. This is the button sew on foot. The button sew on foot has two little rubber toes that helps hold the button so it keeps from slipping. The little screw on the side of the foot will adjust the little bar, the prong that's in the center, so that you can build in a thread shank for your buttons so that it will accommodate your all kinds of widths of fabric. As soon as you select the button sew on program number 60, your feed dogs automatically drop, and that's just a really nice bonus about having this machine, because as the needle is going back and forth to sew the button on, you definitely don't want the feed dogs engaged, so it automatically drops those for you. And then if you truly hate sewing buttonholes, then let the embroidery machine do it for you. So carrying the buttonhole that you've adjusted with your slit width and the length that you need, just take it into embroidery, just like we did with our combination and our other stitches. And then you could set this up as an embroidered function. And voila! So just a couple of thoughts about having successful buttonholes. Remember, if you're, this is all for sewing, you do need to let it sew until completion. Be sure you keep your foot pressed if you're using the foot control until the needle stops. It will not start to sew another buttonhole if you have your foot on the gas. It's sewing one thing and stopping. So just keep your foot on the gas or use the start-stop button. Use your automatic cutter after each buttonhole. So if you want to use the scissor, you can. It works perfectly, takes that top thread down to the underneath side as well. On some of your fabrics, you may need to stabilize with lightweight tearaway stabilizer. If you're putting buttonholes onto a lighter weight fabric, you don't want it to tunnel or to buckle, so a piece of lightweight tearaway works perfect and then is easily removed. The buttonhole cutter and block, this is the coolest thing ever. I remember when I first took my lessons on the Bernina machine, they showed me one of these, and I still have it. I just love it. But it's a very secure way to open up a buttonhole without cutting anything you don't want to cut, either with scissors and definitely not your seam ripper. And again, your button sew on program, be sure that it sews to the end of the program, because as the needle swings back and forth in between putting those stitches in, it takes some supplemental knots, but you want to be sure you get those last ending knots as well. So that's just a few words on buttonholes. You will love the beauty of the buttonholes on a Bernina, and I think with a lot of the different styles that have been added, you have a complete repertoire of buttonholes to select from. Another great feature of your 880 is tapering, and this is a great way to, to do anything that needs a tapered point or perhaps an applique design that you're working with. So there is a menu that is built into your machine. It's menu 1401, and it contains stitches that would make patterns that looked good if they were tapered. So you will notice that some of these are irregular stitches, but you will see not every stitch is in the tapering menu, and that's because they selected the ones that were the best looking. So in menu 1401, there's a nice selection of stitches to look for. We're looking at and working with stitch 1402. The presser foot selection helps us out by recommending the appropriate foot. And in our action bar, we have the 3 different sections of the tapering stitch. There's a beginning point, there's a middle, and there's an end point. You have 5 different end point styles that you can work with in tapering. 4 are pre-programmed for you, and the last style is a tapering point that you can determine and set yourself. So when you've selected the tapering stitch, you want to go into the eye function, and you'll see another one of those functions that has been previously not illuminated, because this doesn't apply to other things that we've done. So we have a tapering stitch on the screen, and you'll see something that is displaying the tapering configuration. So you'll select that, and we're just going to step through each of these tapering configurations to show you what the endpoints look like, what the configuration looks like on screen, and then what it looks like stitched out. To go on to go to the next tapering configuration, you want to select the eye breadcrumb, so up in the little upper corner of this menu, and then we'll select a different tapering option. So this is one that's going to give you more of a 45-degree angle. The next one is another 45-degree angle, but it's going the other direction. And you'll see kind of like a boxy shape that you can make, as well as another decorative type of stitch you could do. Then there is this taper. And then the last taper is the manual taper, and this is where you can select the angle of your taper and the point that you want. So you adjust the plus and the minus icons. This is not, you don't see the little image of the hand with the knob, so you're not using that. You're actually using the plus or minus, and you're programming the angle and the position of that taper. And this is just an example of some of the tapers that you can achieve working with some of those neat little shapes. You'll see a decorative one, and you see one that's, kind of almost a satin stitch. So let's take a look at what goes on inside the taper. As I said before, segments 1 and 3, that's the ending point and the beginning point. Those have pre-programmed lengths. You're not really going to do much on those unless you've done the manual taper. But those points are set. But what you can determine and set is the middle segment, and that is your programmable length. So another function that you have within this eye menu for tapering is the ability to set the length of what you want that middle section to be. So you can do that before you start. Perhaps you've measured exactly the piece that you want, and you can program this in. Now this is, if you're working with this is the satin stitch, so stitch 1401, it's no problem with how many of these you can program. And again, to get to that middle of the taper, if you're doing this as a manual length, you're not going to program the taper, then you're going to see the little quick reverse button come up, and that's your reminder that you're going to need to press the quick reverse button to tell it, I'm done stitching the length of the middle, go ahead and finish the end. So you can do it both ways. You can pre-program the length, or you can do it on the fly just by touching the quick reverse. Some of your tapers that you have set parts that go into the taper. So like this design, stitch 1409 for example. If I were to turn the dial or touch the plus symbol, it's going to jump in increments of 7 or decrease by increments of 7 because it needs at least that much to complete one of those little triangle pieces. So that's one case where you'll see those numbers not jump sequentially, and that will be why. So there is another way about manual tapering, and this is where you can just select the manual. You'll start with the point. This is stitch number 1401. Have your manual tapering, and you'll just go and go and go. You can see how it's curved, and then you touch the quick reverse button to move to segment 3, and you're done. So that's a fun way to work with tapering and to incorporate into some of your projects. I can't say that I've used it a whole lot for applique, but some of the patterns that were selected for tapering are really pretty, and when you make those little box shapes, they are unique little units in themselves for decoration, and they can be a fairly large piece. And then it's also really cool to take those over into embroidery, and then you can embroider those boxes. So this, again, just like with everything else, can move into embroidery, and that would be your tapering. So something else that we're very excited to have added to our machines is dual feed. Dual feed was one of the most requested features in the research that was done by Bernina when they were creating the original 8 series and that introduction a couple of years ago. So the dual feed, way cool. You probably don't even know it's there if you just didn't know to look for it, because it is completely out of the way when it's not in use, which means you don't have anything hanging down, getting in the way of anything else you might be working on. So I know that a lot of times we work on those large bags. They're really cumbersome. They become three-dimensional as we're building them. Well, you really wouldn't need something in your way to prevent the feed of your project from moving through the machine. So that's a really nice, handy feature with Bernina, is that is it on the back of the machine, it's completely out of the way. It also has a separate motor, so you have a little bit better control on the fabric, and then you can fine-tune that. Using the information menu, we can use the fine-tune adjustment to help control that fabric feed. The dual feed is a wonderful device for sewing long seams, all kinds of stuff, and difficult fabrics easily. Another advantage is it sews 9mm stitches, and it goes forward and backwards. So what's cool about, you maybe think, well, it's a 9mm machine. Oh, I mean, duh. Well, in some of our sewing situations, if I'm sewing on something that's bulky, I might be using my walking foot, and my walking foot's only 5.5mm wide. So now I have a little bit more capability of working with the dual feed to get those 9mm stitches on maybe some projects that have been difficult in the past. And there are multiple D feet to assist you in your different sewing situations that you might have. Taking a look at the number 1C foot and the dual feed foot number 1D, you'll see that there's a difference. 1C foot has a full sole. So it's completely solid, there's no missing pieces. If you look at the D foot, you see that the back part of the sole is cut out, and that's where the dual feed is going to rest. But the dual feed foot is only, it only does the job it's supposed to do if that dual feed is sitting in that gap. Otherwise, you don't really have the control over your fabric, you don't have a complete presser foot, and you don't have a dual feed on. Unfortunately, the machine does not tell you you have a dual feed foot on, engage the dual feed arm. So get yourself in the habit of, as soon as you attach a dual feed foot, the next step before you do one thing more is to bring that dual feed and engage it to the foot. You will realize that you forgot to engage the dual feed, but usually it's after you've done something, and you probably will think, well, that looks terrible. And that will be why. The dual feed feet do not work very well unless the dual feed is engaged. So engaging the dual feed, you're going to reach up behind the machine with your thumb and your forefinger, and you're going to just hold the little device, and then you're just going to let it sit in the open space of that foot. It doesn't really connect, but it sits back there. The only way that you can attach the dual feed is if the presser foot is up. So you can see how it rests in the back of the foot. You also may have noticed the little teeth that were on the dual feed, and that is to help control the fabric, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. When it comes time to remove the dual feed, the presser foot has to be up also. You will never get the dual feed off if the presser foot is down. So save yourself some trouble. Use the presser foot up-down button to make the foot go up, and then to get this off, again, taking the device between your thumb and your forefinger, take it down think of a backwards J, or a hook. You're just going to go down and then back up, and you're going to walk the device up to its resting position at the machine. Because it is new, it may not be uncommon that it flies out of your hand as you are starting, but that's not how you really want it to go back into its position on an everyday basis. And when it flies out of your hand, it does run the risk of not being in its resting position. Anytime it is not in its appropriate resting position, the machine thinks the dual feed is engaged, and it could cause you some additional messages you wouldn't understand you're getting, and we'll talk about that. So we were just talking about the dual feed. Gosh, it sure would be nice if there was something on the machine that helps me with this. This is something new for me to put my head around. So consult the tutorial. So select the tutorial from your system settings bar, select the presser foot, select engaging dual feed, and you'll be able to step through those exact same things that we just did. These are some of the animations that you'll see, and it shows you how you're able to attach this and how you're able to remove it. So why do you need dual feed? Dual feed's kind of late on the scene for Bernina machines, and Bernina machines have always sewn very, very well. So what can Bernina feed do for you? Dual feed do for you? It's going to offer you a little bit better control of the fabric. No matter what you're sewing, the pressure of the presser foot can cause your fabrics to shift. So the dual feed is actually going to start to help control that fabric, but the dual feed works after the stitch is made. So the stitch is made and the dual feed just kind of pulls that top fabric back. It's an active system, so remember, it has its own motor, and it's actively pulling the fabric from the top side. So you can see the difference with and without the dual feed. You may want to fine-tune how your dual feed foot works by adjusting the presser foot pressure, and that's something that helps. It's a great assistance when you're working with the dual feed. A lot of times I will adjust my presser foot pressure, and I don't always adjust my fine-tune, but we'll look at that as well. So the Bernina dual feed can control the fabric more or less, can control the fabric more with less pressure from the presser foot. So that's why you might want to use it. So when you are, we've all sewn polar fleece or fabrics that are thick and spongy, and it's not uncommon that the top layer finishes ahead of the bottom layer, and we don't really want that. So sewing polar fleece with a standard foot, you could get a result like this, but working it with dual feed, because it's pulling that top layer to the back, then it should end up nice and even when you're complete. Anytime you're working with stretchy faux fabrics, that's another great time to work with the dual feed, and you will love your dual feed zipper foot. Trying to put those 9mm stitches on polar fleece. Okay, in the past you might have decided to work this with your walking foot. So again, you've got the 9mm stitches that you can use, and because it goes forward and backwards, it will work with a whole variety of your 9mm stitches. And you can see the difference in the results. You do get a much nicer stitch formation with the dual feed versus without. Talking about decorative stitches, the dual feed will never be used with sideways motion stitches. Dual feed, other techniques that you might enjoy using dual feed for is long seams of any kinds of fabrics. I've even found where it's very nice to put bindings on. Spongy fabrics, things that want to creep and move at different levels or paces. Stretchy fabrics, slippery fabrics. I always think about the dual feed working with all of those problem fabrics, but things that we want to work with. So joining laces for heirloom sewing is another great way to work with it, and anytime you want to attach ribbons to fabrics. The dual feed does not mind if it is not on an even surface. So even if it's like a little bit at a slant, it works much better than the walking foot, which prefers to be completely even. So just a couple of differences. Your fine-tune adjustment, where can you find that? There is a separate motor, so you can fine-tune how it is controlling your fabric. So it does make small adjustments, and you always want to test your settings. So you'll select the eye when you have your dual feed foot engaged. You've got your stitch, you'll select the eye, and then you'll have to scroll. So you'll vertically scroll to see those last two icons, one of which is your fine-tune adjustment. And when you select your fine-tune adjustment, you will see this screen, and you will move the little slider. And you can see it goes from 2 to -2, so just little bits will go a long way. But this is balancing the control of the fabric and not the stitch. There are 2 dual feed feet that come with the machine, your all-purpose foot number 1D and then your zipper foot number 4D. So just for regular sewing and zippers, you have your D foot. But there are other feet that were selected to come to the D level, and these are pictured here. So there are other piecing feet that you have. 37D is a patchwork foot, as well as 57D. That's your patchwork foot with guide. 20D is your open embroidery foot. You've got a non-stick foot. You have 14D, which we'll look at in a minute. You have a jeans dual feed foot, an edge stitch dual feed foot, and a clear dual feed foot, and we'll look at why some of these might be important. We also have one more. Newest one to the list is a new foot. It's patchwork foot number 97D, and this is a foot that was developed to work with feed dogs of 9mm. So all machines with 9mm feed dogs will enjoy using either the 97 or the 97D foot. If you look at the schematic, you'll see that there is a wider back end for the foot, and that will rest and ride a little bit more evenly on the full width of the feed dogs, giving you more control. There are a couple of things that come with this great new foot, and that is what we used to call the screw-in seam guide. It screws into the bed of the machine, but this is going to give you that wall that you need to be sure that your 1/4 inch seams stay 1/4 inch. So if you look back at the schematic, you'll notice one side has a little cutout area. This is where the seam guide rests up next to. You screw this into place, and now you have a perfect 1/4 inch with a wall, so you don't need, you wouldn't have to use the 1/4 inch foot with the guide. You have that built in. But if you look at the measurements of the foot, if you guide to either toe of the outside of the foot, you have your 1/4 inch seam. Guiding to the inside or to this mark, you have your 1/8 of an inch seam, and you still have your 1/4 inch markings on the back, and then some additional information about the sizes of what's on the back end of that foot. Very, very handy foot for piecing. I think everybody's going to truly love it. Then you also have a straight stitch plate that comes with your machine. To truly perfect your straight stitch, put a straight stitch needle plate on. You'll either have the straight stitch plate / cut work, which is typically what you'll have, but you have a straight stitch plate with your machine. And other straight stitch feet to use would be either any of your piecing feet, 1/4 inch feet, and the jeans foot, number 8D. So what else do they do? So there's the traditional piecing feet that we've had, 57D, the one with the guide, and then 37D without the guide. I will never give up my 37D foot because I love having that small footprint. I use it for all kinds of things, even when I'm not piecing. edge stitch foot, perfect for when you need to put top stitching or edge stitching onto something, or even when you want to stitch in the ditch. With it set at center needle position, and a new stitch that you are going to fall in love with is in your quilting menu. It's the large ladder stitch, and when it is appropriately stitched to where all the straight stitches fall in the ditch of the seam, all you see are those big wide stitches going across, and it just looks awesome. So that is stitch number 1356. 14D, this is another zipper foot, but that little bar on the foot can move, so it'll move into different places, which will help you get your stitching a little bit more even for sewing with zippers, whether you're doing top stitching or you're inserting the zipper. The clear reverse pattern dual feed foot number 34D, this is like a clear number 1. But what's awesome about it is you can see through it. So when you want to see side to side and what's going on and balancing something, you have that. I also like the red markings because that helps you line things up when you need to. Your jeans dual feed foot number 8D, maybe you're working with denim, but even if you're not, we're all making bags, and we're all making bags with either Sew Stable or some sort of filler to make them more sturdy and stand up. So I use my jeans foot for many of those types of things with the dual feed, because that's going to help go through all of those layers. And the dual feed foot is so handy with the jeans foot is so handy because it prevents the deflection or the breaking of a needle. So the foot actually pivots and kind of travels with, just helps protect the needle. So that's really, really quite handy. Then anytime you're sewing vinyls or sticky fabrics, you want to use your Teflon foot or your non-stick foot. This is a zigzag, so it could do the full 9 millimeters, dual feed foot, and it's sewing on vinyl to a piece of fabric. And nothing works better than this for working with slippery fabrics. Your open toe embroidery foot with dual feed, anytime that you're working on lots of layers and you want to use some the 9 millimeter stitches and have an open view, the number 20 is your foot. The adjustable guides that we looked at the beginning of our series, remember they do and can fit into your dual feed foot. They go from either side, and there is an adjustable guide that rides on top of the fabric just for balancing your seams, and there's also an adjustable edge guide that rides at the edge of the fabric anytime you want to do like some top stitching. Now, I mentioned earlier about dual feed and sideways motion stitches, and this is a combination that does not work, and this is what the machine considers an incompatible setup. So if you have a dual feed foot on, or the dual feed foot mechanism is not resting in its regular place, and the machine thinks it's engaged, and you select a sideways motion stitch, you will get something that looks like this, and it is telling you that what you are trying to do is not going to work, and that you need to adjust your machine environment. So the dual feed arm may not be in the correct position, or perhaps you've tried to do a sideways motion stitch with a dual feed foot, and that just is not going to work. The dual feed forwards and backwards is not geared to go sideways. So let's say that you've checked everything and everything looks good, and you're still getting this message and you're not really sure why. You can use the presser foot button up and down, and that sort of just cycles the current machine status to the brain of the machine and sort of just refreshes it. So at that point, that may be all you need to do. That's typically all you need to do, and that will allow you to move on into your next thing. So the question often comes up, the walking foot or the dual feed? Or I have dual feed, is there a reason to have the walking foot? So let's talk about that. The dual feed, that is your active system. It actively pulls the fabric from the top side. It also has a motor that is working independently of the feed dogs. It begins working after the stitch is made, and it controls the fabric and prevents distortion from pressure foot pressure. Your walking foot is not an active system. It is a passive system. That little fork attaches to the bar, the needle bar. All layers are moved at the same time and pace according to the movement of the feed dogs only. There is nothing going on with the top. Those top little rubber pieces, they actually are sandwiching all the layers together with the feed dog so that all of the fabric layers are moving through the machine at the same pace. So it's perfect for quilting 3 layers because you've got 3 things that need to move through the machine at the same time, not just 2. So I often think 2 layers, 2 for dual, so I usually think 2 layers. I use my dual feed. If it's more than 2, I'm going to use my walking foot. So those are just some of the things that you can think about, which one you might want to use. The Bernina stitch regulator. Have you tried this? Now, this machine sews at 1,200 stitches per minute. That is very fast. And the Bernina stitch regulator can match that at 1,200 stitches per minute. So that's huge because the faster the machine can go, the faster you can sew, the faster you can sew more things. It's not that we want to finish faster, we just want to do more stuff. So the Bernina stitch regulator, this is something that comes with the machine. It comes in a nice little tin. It comes with 3 soles. One is a C shape, one is a closed like an O shape, and one is a clear sole. They all offer different things to you when you're using them. The C shape gives you a little bit more visibility. The closed shape means nothing could get hooked in the little C, and perhaps you just prefer that. The clear one also sits like a little dish. I like it when I am doing things that have like raw edges because the little dish just floats over top of it. The little clear piece gives you great visibility. It also has some concentric rings, so if you wanted to use it for echo quilting, you could. You attach the stitch regulator to your machine first, then take the plug and plug it into the back of the machine. That is going to open up your Bernina stitch regulator screen. The foot is going to automatically set for you to 42, and the feed dogs are automatically going to drop because this is a free motion technique. You can use the Bernina stitch regulator with a straight stitch and a zigzag, and so there's lots of cool fun options for you. You have 2 different modes that you can work in, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth in just a minute. But Mode 1, and that's the one that is selected. You see how it's depressed like it was the button is pushed down. You have constant power to the needle once you are giving it power. So the needle starts to move right away. As soon as it gets power, either from the start-stop button or from the foot control, the needle starts to move. Mode 2, the needle only moves when the fabric is moving. Then you also have a speaker. Right now it is turned to on. It'll be grayed out if it is off. And where the speaker helps you is that the Bernina stitch regulator can only help you if you stay within the limits that it's geared to work. The machine is rated at 1,200 stitches per minute. But if you are trying to stitch faster than 1,200 stitches per minute, then you're going to hear a beep, a loud beep. Also, the start-stop button is going to flash red. When it's flashing too fast, when you are sewing too fast, the machine cannot guarantee, or you're not giving it enough time to regulate your stitch, and you will end up with irregular stitches. The beep that it makes is the loudest of the sounds because that's what you're going to want to hear over the machine noise. You also have the opportunity to turn it off if you prefer. If you turn it off, then you'll be seeing the red. Your alarm will be the little red light that goes on by the start-stop button, and that's when you'll know that you are going too fast. Again, there is also help on board built into the machine 24/7 through your tutorial. So there is the BSR, and then you have its general function. You have an explanation about BSR mode 1 and 2 and about the beeper. So, pretty much everything you need to know. So this is information about the BSR, mode 1 and mode 2. So how do you get used to working with this, and what would be some tips that I could offer you? If you think about how free motion is worked, you know, you could make little patterns out of your head while you are learning to work with a new tool and the beepers beeping at you and you don't know if you like mode 1 or mode 2 yet. So my suggestion is to get started is to select a fabric that has something printed on it, something that you can follow. So you don't have to think about what the pattern is that you are making. You can either trace the printed pattern or, like what I'm doing here with the thread painting, I'm just sort of doodling. I'm just going back and forth with ever so slightly curved lines coming out of the center of this flower, and I'm getting used to my Bernina stitch regulator. So here is where I'm going to play with mode 1 and mode 2, and I'm going to decide if I like the constant power to the needle as soon as it gets power, or if I prefer to only have the needle move when I'm moving the fabric after I get power. And again, power is sent to the needle by either the foot control or the start-stop button. Once you are playing around with that and you're ready to move on to some other things, or maybe you want to start here. And these are just some little Bernina stitch regulator exercises, or calisthenics, so to speak. And these are just some little things for you to think about and to try so that you can get in the habit of making shapes, because when you do go to your project, you probably do want to make some shapes. Do you want to make little zigzags? Or do you want to make them up and down, or do you want to make them sideways? What about making sort of like a little cityscapes with the blocks on number 2, or a curve going backwards, a curve going forward, and puzzle pieces. So these are things to try. Most of us have doodled in our life, and we've always done that with pen and paper. So to get used to these exercises and to help train your brain to what you're going to do with the machine, draw these on paper first so that your brain can kind of get trained in the motions that you're going to be doing, so when you go to thread and machine, it becomes a lot easier. The Bernina Stitch Regulator offers a lot of creative opportunities for you in your projects. And think outside the box a little bit. What if you were to work upside down and you were to do bobbin play with the Bernina Stitch Regulator? Some of you may be going, I don't even know what bobbin play is, so we're going to get to that in just a minute. Or what if you put in a twin needle with your Bernina Stitch Regulator and got a shadow quilted look? So that's just something to think about. So talking about bobbin play, with this great machine and the super big bobbin, you've got to do this. You've just got to try it if you never have. But there are so many fantastic threads on the market, so many thick threads that do not go through the eye of a needle. You'll never get to use them on the top of your fabric unless you do this. So we're going to actually be winding these really cool, beautiful threads to the bobbin. And then we're going to work upside down. And then we're going to still use our awesome decorative stitches. And that's going to transfer to the front of the fabric, which is facing down, coming from the bobbin. So what can you work with? Thick threads like these, Razzle Dazzle, Pearl Crown Rayon, Candlelight, silk ribbon, 4mm silk ribbon's beautiful. What foot are you going to use? You're going to want to use a foot that has one of those tunnels on the underneath side, such as 20C, because even though the bulk is on the underneath side, that's still going to help allow it to move a little bit better for you. What is so great, one of the many great things about the Bernina 880 is you're able to adjust that bobbin case on the machine yourself. So there is no need for a second case. Remember, the case does not come out, so the one you have is the one you have. So this is where you'll use your multifunction tool. You're going to open the door. The bobbin's going to present itself. You're going to put your left hand under the bobbin case. With your right hand, you're going to roll the hand wheel until this little silver area moves to the right enough that you're able to get the multifunction tool on top of this little post. In its normal state, you can't get the multifunction tool over top of this little post, so you have to rotate the hand wheel while holding this to allow this metal piece to move to the side. Then you can put the multifunction tool over top of that little metal post. You move it, this will be up to you. 3 to 4, 2 to 3 clicks to the left. and this will increase your top, and then you're going to also increase your top tension 1 to 2 levels. This is going to loosen the tension in the bobbin to allow the thickness of those threads to come out easily from the bobbin. You will then thread the bobbin like normal into the slit if you are working with everything except silk ribbon. Silk ribbon we handle a little differently. You wind it the same, so you can still wind this on your machine just as you normally would. When you're working with silk ribbon, you're going to use the little threader that came with the machine. You will put the threader through the little hole. You do not need to loosen the bobbin case tension for this technique. You need to leave it, set it standard. I poke the little device through the hole, and then I put my silk ribbon in there and I pull it through. It's already wound onto the bobbin, so I've sort of adjust this so that the silk ribbon is going through the bobbin case. You are not putting the silk ribbon into the slit. There is also a very good explanation of working with silk ribbon in your manual. And then you always test. I typically test with a feather stitch. When I get my feather stitch set, I know everything is good for just about everything else I'm going to do. So what's in your needle? Either a matching, you want a matching thread color or monofilament, an invisible thread. I tend to use isocord a lot because I have all kinds of colors. But you know, your monofilament would allow you to do a project where you don't have to always be changing your needle thread every time you change your bobbin thread. So these are just some of the fun examples that you can play and try with, and some of the stitches that you might want to work with. These are all with the heavy decorative threads except for the middle one, which is silk ribbon, and that is stitch number 603. You can also create combinations and stitch them with your bobbin play. So you can do single stitches, but also try, you know, some of your combinations. One thing you may want to do as a combination is to add a little spacer stitch, and it's just a little straight stitch. It's stitch number 32, and it gives you a single straight stitch. And this just may give you just the gap that you need so that when you do get to the next stitch you can see it. There's not so much thread all bunched together. So that will give you some more options. Don't forget some of your creative functions such as elongation. Again, just like we were mentioning with the thicker thread, the stitch may end up looking too crowded. So what you see, the top row is it's regular, but see how much cool, how it looks cool both ways, but see how much bigger the stitch looks when you elongate it a little bit. Third row, standard, and then elongated. So with the thicker thread, you can actually make your stitches look like they're totally something different. There is built-in assistance for this, because I know this is something you may not remember everything that you learned while you're in class. So you do have some built-in assistance. Again, consulting your tutorial, select techniques, bobbin play, and it's going to, this is going to scroll. This isn't all you get. It's a scroll, vertically scroll like your smartphone, and it's going to tell you what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, some things to consider. It also has some threading diagrams, so this is how we were working with the silk ribbon. So that is all on here as well. And then don't forget to reset your bobbin tension when you are finished with this technique. And you can do this easily because you have a diagram on your bobbin door that tells you exactly where that little metal post needs to be returned to. So look at the little diagram. If it says center like this one does, then you're going to move that post until the little metal post lines up with this white dot on your bobbin case. And that is going to finish off your bobbin play series. That will allow you to sew regularly or go into embroidery without having any kind of distorted tension. That also completes our lesson for today, and it's been a lot of things, but you probably can see how all of these things really help smooth out your sewing and give you really nice fluid results. When we meet again, we will be talking about embroidery. So we have a couple more sessions left, and we're going to learn and explore all the great creative functions that you have in embroidery in our next 2 sessions. Thanks, and enjoy sewing.